Hello, everybody, and welcome to season 2 of 8 Days of Diana Wynne Jones. I'm Rebecca Framo.
And I'm Emily Tesh, and we are very excited to begin taking you through Diana Wynne Jones' work of the 1980s. To me, this is the decade, the Florian. The 70s leads up to this, and everything afterwards is a response to this. But in the 1980s, Diana Wynne Jones releases 9 books, actually, of which we'll be dealing with 8 this season. And they are a sequence of bangers. Is how I put this.
This whole decade is really, really good.
Right. She's just incredibly good this whole time. So, what are you looking forward to this decade, Becca?
Oh my gosh. So it's taken me a while to come up with a consistent answer over the decades, over my own decades of life, when people ask me what my favorite Diana Wynne Jones is. But these days I usually say Homeward Bounders. I'm very excited to do Homeward Bounders.
Oh, I am so excited for Homeward Bounders. I'm excited to get to Howl's Moving Castle.
Yeah,
I have opinions about.
yeah.
I am very, very excited to get to Fire and Hemlock, which Jones herself, I think, probably considered her best or one of her best novels, and which certainly is kind of the midpoint, the turning point around which the whole rest of her career seems to like rotate.
We're gonna go long on Fire and Hemlock. We can't not.
Yeah, we are. But this week we are looking at The Magicians of Caprona, which is the second novel in the Crestomancy series. I think this is interesting.
Yeah.
Because imagine, you've just written, right? Book 3 of your planned quartet, and we've decided it was definitely planned to be a quartet because it's organised around the 4 quartets.
Yep.
Thank you to the listener who pointed that out. You've written book 3 of your quartet. You know there needs to be a book 4. You're not writing the book 4. You're writing Magicians of Caprona.
Which is a sequel to a book that you already wrote that, in and of itself, seems to stand perfectly well alone.
Right, it's a sequel, but it's not a very Crestomancy-ish Crestomancy book. He's not there very much, and his main purpose is to be one of the 2 Deus Ex Machina figures in this book, and we'll talk about that a bit.
Right, and I think the other thing that makes this really interesting and a very fun follow-up actually to, so you guys are hearing this probably sometime in May. We're recording this 2 weeks after we recorded our Q&A session. And one of the questions that came up in that Q&A session was, wow, it seems like Diana Wynne Jones does a lot of downer endings. And we thought about it and we said, yeah, it seems like she does do a lot of downer endings. We wonder if she can really do a proper happy ending. And then we looked at what we had up next, and we were like,
herself this question, right?
Right. And we were like, oh, wait, we're about to do Magicians of Caprona.
Okay, and I'll say this feels really intentional to me because Magicians of Caprona, short version, is a remix, right? It's 2 texts. Diana Wynne Jones loves to take a text and do something with it. It's 2 texts stuck together, twisted up, swirled around, and turned into a 1980s children's book. And the texts she's picked are Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, which is an Elizabethan tragedy, and John Webster's The White Devil, which is a slightly later Jacobean tragedy.
I would argue that it is, in fact, at least 3 texts, though. Because I'm going to say that she's also thrown in there quite a bit of the classic, 1940s children's war story in there.
You know what? I think you may well be right. Although I wonder if that's a text so much as Jones's own childhood. Remember, she was an evacuee. She had the experience of being a child growing up in like a city where war is about to break out.
That's true. I do think that she's, there's a lot of jokes in there on, the most heroic boy in school genre, which is sort of a reference text in the story.
Jones loves to make jokes about other children's books, which
she really does.
Books. But yeah, what really struck me in this one is this is a book whose strong roots are in 2 tragedies, both of which end up with the stage covered in corpses.
Sorry, one more text. Punch
Go
and
on.
Judy. We
Punch
can't
and
forget
Judy.
Punch
Yeah,
and
yeah, Punch
Judy.
and Judy, which also ends up with a stage covered in corpses, but is not a tragedy, and we'll come back to that.
Uh-huh.
So she's working with theatre. Like she's writing the book, but she's very much drawing on like performance and theatrical performance as the route for this. And she's working with tragic and vengeance themed theatre, and it's a comedy. It's possibly one of the lightest and fluffiest books that we'll have this decade. It's a
Yeah.
straightforward happy ending. Everything turns out fine. It feels so intentional and to me, and so self-conscious about, yeah, I can do comedy. Not just as like I can write things that are funny, which we already knew, but as I can do comedy as a genre.
Yeah, it's really her first pure comedy since Wilkins Tooth and The Ogre Downstairs. And in a lot of ways, as we were reading it, we were like, this book has a weird amount in common with Wilkins Tooth.
It
Um,
does. It's another one that feels like a little bit like a rerun because it's got firstly this sort of large child cast.
yes, there are so many kids in this book. Not as many as in Wilkins Tooth. There are maybe like 5, 6 kids in this book that we care about, and I'm not counting Rosa and Marco, who are not kids because they're Romeo and Juliet.
Yep. Although
Uh,
they are both very young, and they seem
yes,
they end up on like the kids' side, the kids' team in the ultimate conflict.
yes.
Um, so the basic
And
setup.
Romeo and Juliet are kids also. So okay, I'm retracting that. We can put Rosa and Marco in the child bucket.
Kids brackets, slightly older. But yeah, the basic plot of Magicians of Caprona is easy, and you already know it because it's the basic plot of Romeo and Juliet. Two households, both alike in dignity in fair Caprona, where we set our scene.
Yeah, it really does just scan perfectly.
In fact, two rival houses of magicians, the Montanas and Montana and Petrocchi. My Italian is not good. I
Oh, me
apologize
neither.
in advance for mispronunciations. And these are rival magical families which hate each other and are constantly getting into street fights. And this is Act One, Scene One of Romeo and Juliet. You don't need me to go through it.
Yes.
Um,
Now, one thing I did think was really interesting, even from the very beginning of this book, is so my copy has a little note at the beginning saying, "Just so you know, children, this is set in an Italy that is not unified. In your world, Italy is one country. In this world, it is not." This is not a little note that you need at the beginning of Romeo and Juliet because Romeo and Juliet is set in the 16th century. Magicians of Caprona begins in the present tense. It starts out here in Italy in the city of Caprona. We have this problem. We have these are some things that you might see if you go to Caprona.
prologue.
It's
It's the
prologue,
little tourist guide to Caprona, which is also a prologue.
right? And then it says, in spite of the recent troubles, these are the things that are happening. So,
You
what
said
magicians
this,
of
and I went, no.
uh, so I was like, this can't be another troubles book. It can't be another troubles book. It's not very much, but it is a
It's
little
not
bit.
not a Troubles book.
It's not a troubles book, but it is a modern book. It's I think even more so than so this is a sequel to Charmed Life. Charmed Life when it begins drops you into what seems like a kind of Edwardian England. And it's not really until Janet arrives, Janet who is in a parallel world in the 1970s, that you realize that that time period in Charmed Life is meant to be sort of equivalent to our own time period here. But Magicians of Caprona is a modern book. It starts out in the present tense. You, as a reader, are like, this is happening now. This is the kind of thing that could happen now, despite the fact that we are in an alternate Italy and the events that are happening are mostly drawn from 16th century tragedies, which I think is kind of an interesting choice. And then, they've got cars, they've got telephones, they've got when the war comes, because the war does come, they've got guns and shells. It's not sabers and knights. It's all the technology is recognizable.
Right, I will say it feels certainly more 40s than, say, 80s to me, in that, like, we have cars, sure, but they're still a bit unusual. And you have the great sequence where the Montana family visits the ducal palace in Caprona and they take their magic coach and horses, which are actually made of cardboard and only animated by magic. And it starts to rain on the way home, and the coach and
Yeah.
horses fall apart. And this is what finally sends the head of the family to go, right, I'm writing a letter to Ferrari and a letter to Rolls Royce. We're getting a car.
Right.
There is a kind of a point of technological change, technological cusp. So there is like more of a historical feeling than totally contemporary. But you're right, it does feel more modern than Charmed Life by some way.
And that might be just by virtue of the fact that it's, well, by virtue of the fact that it's a follow up, and so she knows that it's contemporaneous to the 70s in some way if you match them up, and she's feeling a bit more confident mixing and matching historical and modern.
But it's
But I
also
do
the
think
thing, right, of story time is always now and here.
exactly, and I do think we're entering a decade that does a lot with time, and that does a lot with sort of where the history being present, the past being now. And it's fun to think of Caprona in a little bit of a way as being in conversation with that, though it's not doing very much with that. As certainly not as much with that as we're going to see later on.
Because it's fluff. It's not just fluff, but Caprona is so frothy. It's like eating a meringue.
Yeah.
Um, that's not completely. I mean, there's lots in Caprona that's dark and even very dark, but the tone is intentionally light the whole way through. I think it does feel almost like a little bit like a relief after Dalemark. We've had a couple of very difficult and dense books back to back, and then Caprona is charming.
Yes, and this is actually one of the things that I think we teased this a little bit in our Q&A episode. But I think one of the theories that you came up with is that you often get these pairs of books in Diana Wynne Jones where it seems like, some of the themes of one that's being written at one time that are kind of one maybe more serious and weighty book kind of come up again, refracted in the next book or in the book right before, that's a little bit lighter and a little bit fluffier and a little bit more fun. And there are some matching themes between Spellcoats and Magicians of Caprona. This is something my wife actually pointed out when I was talking about these books, that both of these, much more than the vast majority of other Diana Wynne Jones books, are actually set in a functional family. They're about a family unit that is threatened not by forces internal to the family, as is often as is usually happening in Diana Wynne Jones, but by an external war that is happening that threatens to break the family apart. But the family in and of itself is a unit. They work together well. They love each other. That's never in question.
Right. This is almost unheard of in Diana Wynne Jones, a genuinely happy family. Which you're right, they're the happy and like secure sibling relationships, which are a source of strength and encouragement for the characters. This is not something we've seen before, apart from in Spellcoats. And it's very seldom. I'm not sure I can think of an instance where we see it again.
Possibly in Dirkholm, but
Oh, yeah.
Dirkholm is also
That's a one.
threatened internally, but by well, Dirkholm is complicated, and we'll get there. But largely speaking, Dirkholm is a happy family, and we're meant to see it as a happy family. But we know that this is a happy family because it has the hallmark of what we've seen as good parentage in previous, kind of stand-in Diana Wynne Jones good parents. When you're unhappy, they come. One of the things that's really notable about, so they're a family of spellcasters. Our protagonists, Tonino and Paolo. I think Tonino is the primary protagonist, but we kind of slide in between the heads of these two sort of, 10 and 11-year-old, I would guess, 11 and 12-year-old. I forget if it says exactly how old they are, boys within this family who are the grandsons of the head of the family. And Paolo, who's the slightly older, is clever. Notably, he's very quick to pick things up. He's very, sort of fits perfectly within the family. Tonino, who is slightly younger, is sad, a little bit more sad and a little bit more stressed because he's slow. He can't seem to pick up spells. But no one ever makes him feel bad for this. Everyone is very, very concerned that he should feel at home and loved. And one of the first scenes we get is Tonino is sad because he's, feeling insecure because he can't pick up spells. And the entire family immediately picks up on this. And they're all like, oh, they all come out into the yard and the courtyard to like talk to each other about it, be like, what are we going to do about Tonino? He's gone off somewhere to be sad. This is Crestomancy, actually. Crestomancy, the good father, comes when he's called, when you call his name. This is Ammon and Libby. They come when you call them. And the entire Montana family, as soon as someone needs them, they are there. They are going to try and solve your problem.
In fact, this turns out to be one of the ways in which the villain of this book is able to use this against them, right? By putting Tonino in danger, she's then able to wind up the Montana family And they do come when they're cool, but they don't always do the right or most useful thing.
No. They're very easy to just sort of like point in a direction, and that direction is often the wrong direction. But they do it fully out
Right.
of love.
I think so. I think I may be projecting a little because when I work on a book, I do often have like a second secret book in my back pocket, which is just for jokes to make me laugh. But it does feel like Jones sometimes does the same set of themes twice, once as tragedy, once as farce. And this one is definitely the farce.
Yes.
But the other thing, the other theme that Jones picks up is this idea of the doubled self. And we talked about this quite a lot at the end of season one, the idea of the multiple self in Jones's work, right? The idea that a person will see themselves in someone else and either love or hate them, but in doing so, they can come to understand themselves better and become greater.
Right.
And we talked about how Jones in her essays goes into like almost the Jungian idea of the sort of the inner self, the shadow self, the animus or anima. The theme or the thesis of Magicians of Caprona is that inside every comedy Italian aunt, there is a secret second hidden double self who is also a comedy Italian aunt.
Yes. 100%. And
That's it. That's the book. So we learn a lot about Tonino's family, right? We learn a lot about Tonino Montana, who I think is the primary protagonist, and he has around him brothers, sisters, siblings, cousins, parents, aunts and uncles, grandparents, an academic great uncle at the university. Like, we get lots and lots and lots and lots of detail about who exactly is who in the Montana family. And then we meet their enemies, their rivals, the bad guys, in Tonino's opinion, for the first half of the book, the Petrockis. And they're exactly the same.
It's when Paolo goes to the Petrocchi house for the first time later on in the book, and the Petrocchis are doing the exact same Montana thing of all coming when they're needed because they're all trying to stop Renata Petrocchi from going on with Paolo Montana, even though they don't know that he's Paolo Montana yet. And he goes, an obvious uncle was leaning over the gallery, an obvious aunt shot out of the kitchen. Like, he recognizes exactly who all these people are because they match up perfectly.
And of course, the fundamental doubled self in Caprona is Tonino and Paolo have exact equivalent opposites, who are also protagonists, who are the two daughters of the Petrocchi family, Angelica and Renata.
And just like Paolo and Tonino, Renata is a very functional Petrocchi. We don't, sort of learn as much about her how she fits into the family as we do with Paolo, but we can assume because we see her being very protective of her younger sister Angelica, who is notorious for getting spells wrong and having once turned her father green.
Right, and I was talking to you about this, and we came up with, in a way, Crestomancy is kind of the childhood neurodivergence series.
Very, very
Jones
much.
wouldn't necessarily have put it that way herself, certainly not in the early 80s, but she did write about Kat that she saw that character as autistic. And indeed, a lot of the problem of Charmed Life is about failed communication and Kat's difficulty understanding what other people think or want or aim to achieve through him.
Yes.
And then Magicians of Caprona is even more straightforwardly a kind of disability parable story in which Tonino and Angelica both have a problem that makes them feel outcast or weird in their family of amazing magicians. They're not particularly good at magic. Tonino's not good at magic because he calls himself slow.
Yes.
He can't focus on school stuff. He doesn't find it interesting. He can't remember things. Honestly, putting on my teacher hat from another life, if I had a kid who behaved like Tonino in a class of mine, I'd be like, can we get this child assessed for ADD? Meanwhile, on Angelica's side, she has a very straightforward, very clear magic dyslexia, where she does spells back to front and inside out, and she is also in a book where spells are based on being able to sing them correctly. She is tone deaf.
Yeah, what they say to each other when they meet, which is in distressed circumstances that we'll get into later. But he says, I hardly know any spells. I'm slow. He had expected Angelica to laugh, and she did, but he thought she need not have laughed in such a mean, exultant way, nor keep saying, oh, that's good, like that. What's so funny, he said. You can laugh. I know all about you turning your father green. You're no better than me. Want to bet, said Angelica, still laughing. No, said Tonino, just make the spell. I can't, said Angelica. It was Tonino's turn to stare and Angelica's turn to blush. A thin, bright pink spread right up to the bulge of her forehead, and she put her chin up defiantly. I'm hopeless at spells, she said. I've never got a spell right in my life. Seeing Tonino still staring, she said, It's a pity you didn't bet. I'm much worse than you are.
Right, so we've got that exact parallel between the two. Everyone has their equal opposite other self. And Tonino finds himself again in Angelica in that they both struggle with this core requirement of how to be who they are within their families because they can't do magic
And
right.
again, I think it's really notable that like Diana Wynne Jones is making a really explicit point of saying that the problem is not the kids' families. You know, when we first learn about Tonino's slowness, it says Tonino was sometimes quite depressed about his slowness. Nobody else minded in the least. And when we find out about Angelica, he says, Doesn't your family mind? And she says, Not much. They don't mind it half as much as I do. Everyone has a good laugh every time I make a new mistake. The family is actually being as supportive as they can be on both sides, but this doesn't stop the kids from feeling inadequate and like they are not living up to the expectations set for them as members of these illustrious spell families. Something else I think is interesting actually about the family is that Tonino's parents are part of this story, but you know, they're as much part of the story as kind of any other Montana. But one of the first things that we hear about Tonino's parents is that they also are a bit different. They're sort of outsiders within that family. The description we get of them is that Antonio was a thin, worried person who laughed less often than the other Montanas. He was different. One of the differences was that instead of letting old Niccolo carefully choose a wife for him from a spell house in Italy, Antonio had gone on a visit to England and come back married to Elizabeth. So their father is anxious and doesn't kind of fit into this jolly background of all the loud, talkative, enthusiastic Montanas. And their mother is from England, is from a different country, which lets her bring in a lot of English elements that otherwise she might not be able to, which I think she doesn't feel quite comfortable without. But also, you know, their mother is an outsider in this family. And I'm curious what you make of the fact that that's true.
Well, I think it's really funny that Elizabeth, structurally, Elizabeth is there to justify Crestomancy turning up. Because it doesn't make much sense for Crestomancy to be there, except that he and Elizabeth are old friends. And in fact, this whole book, you're like, why is this a Crestomancy book? Did you just kind of feel you had to after the last one won awards? But that's not quite true because Crestomancy is great fun as a character. He sidles onto the page and starts making jokes.
Right. And
About
unlike
halfway through.
Kat, Tonino recognizes that Crestomancy is making jokes. He's allowed to be funny from early on because he's not the dark gothic stranger in Tonino's story. He's just a guy who turns up.
Right. In fact, he almost fulfills the role of the clown. Not even that. No, in fact, he's the opposite. That he's the straight man because he turns up, and immediately the whole Casa Montana erupts in various alarms and excursions, trying to entertain this important guest, while Crestomancy stands there and makes jokes about it. So he's an enabler of comedy.
Yes.
There you go.
And he's also the one who points out, you know, they're all running around having drama around him, and he goes, "What a very Italian scene." So he's queuing us up into how we're supposed to look sometimes at some of this drama, which is, you know, you've all seen movies like this, you've all seen stories like this where everyone runs around and has high Italian drama and Crestomancy. An English person is here to watch it and go, huh, this is kind of funny.
Right. In fact, I would say this is Crestomancy is almost the reader insert, right? Going, this is kind of funny. I do enjoy a comedy Italian.
Right, we seem to be in
and
comedy.
They're not set so much in Italy as in story world Italy from England,
right?
Which is also true of Romeo and Juliet.
Yes, and also speaking of Romeo and Juliet, so I might also argue that it is in fact Rosa's. We're kind of cued that so that Tonino and Paolo have an older sister, Rosa. As we've said, Rosa is Juliet in Romeo and Juliet. Although we don't find this out till the very end of the book, she has a boyfriend called Marco. Rosa and Marco are coming in and out of the story all throughout the book. And at the very end, we discover that Marco is in fact Marco Petrarchi. He and Rosa have been constructing a really elaborate...
They're already married? That's my favourite part. So the Montanos have been like slowly considering, could this Marco boy be good enough for our Rosa? Shall we plan the wedding? Meanwhile, Rosa actually married him months ago, and Angelica was a bridesmaid.
Which, to be fair, just like Romeo and Juliet, they also get married right in Act 2 or 3. and then spend the rest of the play it. But they've sorted themselves right out. They have constructed an elaborate web of lies. Rosa has herself a fake English sister. Everyone thinks she's Rosa Smith. Marco has himself a fake brother. Everyone thinks he's Mario Andretti, and the fake relatives have turned up at the Petrocchi and Montana houses and like introduced themselves. And
You're right. There's a whole like enormously complicated cahoots plot going on in the
yes,
background, which we only get to see like the edges of, which I think is part of the comedy feel of the whole book. Right? There's a whole lot of silliness happening where you just get minor characters dash on, do a comedy bit, and dash off
right.
again.
That's how you know that Marco and Rosa are going to last, because they've been in cahoots from, they were like, the easy part was falling in love and wanting to get married. The hard part
For 5
was
minutes.
setting up.
Which is not surprising because we have seen when you meet your other self, your mirror, your double self, you instantly fall in
Right.
love. And this is the book where Jones goes, "What if I made that heterosexual?"
Yeah, she's never done that before. And she's like, oh, it's so easy. Actually, I could do it in the blink of an eye. Here's Marco and Rosa. You love them. Aren't they charming? They've been in cahoots for 100 pages, and look at the elaborate cahoots plot they've spun. And you're like, oh, wow. Yeah, okay. I do believe that these kids are
Yeah,
actually.
it is totally persuasive. I'm rooting for them. I
Said,
really
I want a
want
26
them to have
episode
a great
sitcom
time.
about Marco and Rosa and their elaborate web of lies. One of the things that I think is funniest is that Rosa's fake sister is in fact the English girl that one of her cousins is crushing on, and this is the cousin who is Tybalt in the Romeo and Juliet story. So they've got that whole thing going on around the edges.
Right. So Rosa has this handsome, talented, brilliant magician cousin, who is slowly revealed over the course of the book as vain and shallow and cowardly. And we'll talk a bit more about
Yes,
Ronaldo and this figure of the sort of failed masculine role model.
yes, but I do think one of
He's
the things.
Tybalt. You're right. He's Tybalt
Yes,
because he's the Prince of
he's the Prince
Cats.
of Cats. But Rosa, I think that we are set up to think that part of the reason that this is a successful comedy Romeo and Juliet and not a tragic Romeo and Juliet is that Rosa is half English. Rosa has an independent attitude. We're told that Elizabeth certainly encouraged Rosa in her independent attitude, and Benvenuto, who is the family cat, informed Tonino that it was the English way. Cats liked English people, he added. So because Rosa is independent minded and English, instead of falling on her own sword and dying about her tragic romance, she rolls up her sleeves and is like,
Has come up with a sensible web of lies so she can have everything she wants.
exactly.
This is a B plot, right?
Yes,
We're into Rosa and Marco because they're extremely funny, but they're not actually the point of the book, because the point of the book is that there is something terribly wrong in Caprona. And it is not clear to Tonino what it is. It is not clear to most of the children what it is. And a lot of like what's dark in this book is the slow growing sense of war in the background.
yes,
The children are not just ignorant of it, but being largely sheltered from, I think, by their worried and anxious elders. Tonino, in particular, seems to be protected by his family from really understanding a lot of what's going on. But Caprona is presented as a fairly weak state, which is only kept supported by the efforts of its spell houses, the Montanas and the Petrocchis. And the Montanas and Petrocchis hate each other so much that they are weakening the whole country. And in the course of that, Caprona's political enemies, who are, by the way, Florence, Pisa, and Siena, so you can look on a map and see exactly where Caprona's supposed to
right.
be, are threatening to invade.
Yes. And Crestomanci turns up quite early on. I'd remembered him just kind of coming in at the end, but he's popping in and out all through. He comes in and says, well, I'm an employee of the British government, so there's really only so much I'm supposed to interfere in this Italian war, but I can try and go to Rome and see if there's some other Italian states that might help you. And then in the background, there's this sort of slowly growing ominous threat that is mostly manifested to Tonino and Paolo, our point of view characters, as adults getting increasingly worried at home, pulling up, old spells and documents and looking at their uniforms and going, oh my god, moths have got into them. And at school, teachers are getting called up to be reservists. Suddenly, their classroom curriculum is sort of different. Everything just feels the world is going strange in ways that feel increasingly ominous. And that reminded me quite a lot of the ways that Diana Wynne Jones talks about her own childhood in World War II.
Right, what she said is that when I was a child, the world went mad.
Yes. And
Uh, and that does seem to be the feeling that Tonino gets, the world is going mad around him.
yes. And I do think so. The fact that this is both a war book and a little bit of a troubles book, I think those things kind of marry to each other in interesting ways. I do think that you feel this is a war book in a very different way than Spellcoats is a war book, right? Because Spellcoats is a war book in that the war has happened, and as we progress through the book, we sort of see its aftermath. Gull, the oldest sibling, comes back and he's got magic PTSD along with other ailments. The father dies. Horrible things. They're floating down the river. They see bodies. Whereas in Spellcoats, the war itself doesn't happen until more or less the last chapter or two. What we're getting is mostly just kind of the ominous buildup, the feeling of the world slowly going mad. And what we're actually seeing on page, meanwhile, is the battles between the Montanas and the Patrokis, and how those are disrupting the city, how they're making people afraid to go out when the Montanas and Patrokis are fighting in the middle of the square. They blast each other, the main square gets completely torn apart, and then it gets put back again because of magic. But like, oh no, these two sides are going to clash. Everyone get into. Oh, hang on, I'm actually gonna read the passage out. Every ordinary citizen, as soon as they saw the entire Casa Montana advancing on the entire Casa Petroki, made haste to get off the street. People knocked on the doors of perfect strangers and were let in without question. The manager of Grossi's, the biggest shop in Caprona, threw open his plate glass doors and sent his assistants out to fetch in everyone nearby, after which he clapped the doors shut and locked the steel grill down in front of them. From between the bars, white faces stared out at the oncoming spellmakers. And a troop of reservists, newly called up and sloppily marching in crumpled new uniforms, were horrified to find themselves caught between the two parties. They broke and ran as one crumpled reservist and sought frantic shelter in the arsenal. So this is a civil war.
This is a description of the Blitz.
Yes, that's true. Actually,
this is the siren went off. Everybody get inside.
Yeah, 100%. And it's sort of like married and mixed together with this idea of civil discourse of civil blood making civil hands unclean, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are writing in the 80s and your childhood is in the 40s, then perhaps you just can't help pulling in a little bit of the troubles in here, and you can't help pulling in a little bit of the blitz.
Yeah, I think those both are sort of underpinning this. To be clear, the magical duel between the Montanas and the Patrokis is still funny.
Oh, yes. Absolutely.
This is a comedy book. So it's all, turning each other into weird things. There's a whole sequence with an elephant and a mouse. There's a giant tomato. There's a lot of flying cowpats at one point. There is a lot of what you might call scatological humor in this. There's a lot of shit in this book. This is it's funny, but it's specifically funny in a children's book way. It's stuff that makes kids laugh.
But it's also, there could not have been more mess if Caprona had been invaded by the armies of Florence, Pisa, and Siena. We see very little of the actual war. This stuff is standing in for the actual war because it is, in fact, the real problem in Caprona is not the menacing armies out on the hills, although people are dying about the menacing armies out on the hills, but the divide between these two spell families who are, in fact, perfect mirrors of each other and have hated each other reflexively on sight for decades.
Centuries, in fact. We're told at the end it's been, I think, 2 or 3 centuries since the original argument. And interestingly, what we hear about the original argument, first we're told the story through Tonino hearing it from older siblings and cousins. And they say, listen, what happened was the ancient head of the Petrocchi family insulted the head of our family. So they invited him to dinner and turned all his insulting words into spaghetti and made him eat it. And he got very sick because everyone hates having to eat their words, which is an extremely funny story. Yes. What Tonino then discovers, later in the book, Tonino is kidnapped. There is a mysterious force at work which is egging on all this conflict and encouraging the menace of the external armies. And encouraging the division between the Montanas and the Patrokis. And Tonino is kidnapped by this force, along with Angelica Petrocchi. And he's stuck with her in a prison, effectively, which we eventually find is a cardboard box. They've been shrunk and put in the box. And he says, and Angelica starts telling him the story of how her ancestor turned the old Montana's insult into spaghetti and made him eat them. And you're like, wait a minute. And it's clear that actually both families know the same story of eating your words, told the other way around, and it must be a lie.
Yep.
Because it's the same lie on both sides, which means that 2 centuries ago, these two guys carefully worked out identical lies to tell their families
Uh-huh.
about what they'd argued about, and ever since then. But that is part of the point of the feud in Romeo and Juliet, right? Is that you never know how or why it started because there can be no justification good
Right.
enough. It doesn't matter how or why it started because it's stupid no matter
And this
what.
is Wilkins' tooth again. An eye for an eye is no way to go about your life, and the Montanas and the Petrocchis have been an eye for an eyeing it for 200 years.
Right.
And Ronaldo, the dashing masculine Tybalt, in fact, awful cousin, early in the book comes home because he's got a cut on his head because he got in a fight with some Petrocchis in the street. Clearly, they were biting their thumbs at each other or whatever. And then he harps on that through the whole book. When Rosa and Marco's secret comes out, he's like, "This scum knocked me down and knocked my head open, and you marry it." Um,
You're thinking, Ronaldo, what were you doing at the time
he
exactly?
absolutely will not get over it. But when we talk about Ronaldo, I want to talk a little bit about the idea that eating your words, because I do think that this is another way in which this book is a comedy mirror of spell codes, is the importance of the magic of words. We're told that in Caprona, it's the spells are words and music, but what we actually hear but Paolo and Tonino Montana were told over and over again, a spell is the right words delivered in the right way. This is a spell code. This is
Yeah, you're right, it is. Interestingly, it's not at all how magic worked in Charmed Life.
no, not at all. And although there is music at play, music is largely irrelevant to the story because they know the tune of the spell that they want. They want the spell to the words of the Angel of Caprona, and they know the
Right,
tune.
so the underlying problem that everyone is trying to solve is that they've been told there's this evil enchanter at work in Caprona who can only be defeated by finding an ancient magical spell, which Crestomatzi tells us is divine in origin. It was given to the city of Caprona by an angel. And they know the tune because they sing the tune every day, but they don't know the right words. And if you know the right words to this divine spell, this, if you like, God spell, or gospel. That's what that is. Once you know the right words and can deliver them in the right way, that will defeat the evil at work in Caprona and everything will be fine.
Yep.
Yeah, that's spell
Yeah.
codes. That's how magic works there.
And here it is specifically a spell that has been handed down to them from an angel.
Yeah, no, the theology of this book is bonkers.
Yeah.
Uh, like, to be clear, for the purposes of Magicians of Caprona, Catholicism is completely and 100% factual.
Yes.
We are confirmed angels and demons in the Crestomancy universe. They've never appeared before and will never appear
No,
again.
absolutely not.
But Crestomancy himself is the one confirming it, so presumably it must be true.
Yeah.
Uh, and there's two Deus Ex Machina figures, right? There's Crestomancy, who represents the loving, benevolent, lightly corrupt arm of the British government, which has no right to interfere but will be interfering
Because
anyway.
they're
Which
friends.
to me feels like a very 20th century British children's
Yes.
fiction thing. It's fine. He's here. It's fine. He's not acting in his official capacity. He is immensely powerful, though. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
And there's even a sequence. Have you got the quote? There's a sequence where they say, "We're not asking you to do anything corrupt," and he's like, "Oh, please ask me to be corrupt."
Oh, I don't think I have the quote, unfortunately.
Funny bit. I might try and dig it out in a second. But right, so that's one Deus Ex Machina. Is Crestomancy himself representing the
Right.
benevolent power of British imperialism, presumably. And the other Deus
Yes.
Ex Machina is literally the angel who comes down from on high, and by on high we mean on top of the cathedral, where the
Right.
Archbishop of Caprona has been blessing people this whole time. And you do find yourself wondering, so when Crestomancy went to Rome, was he going to see the Pope? Is there a
Right.
Pope in this universe?
But it's not like it's interesting, like even though we've got the angel and we've got divine origin, none of it is treated with like religious reverence or anything like that.
Right, no, religion is specifically a form of magic. It's the right words in the right
Right, and the
order.
first word, so the spell to the Angel of Caprona is in Latin, that the proper spell, the proper words. And the first word you actually get of it is Carmen, which means song or chant in Italian, and is the origin of the root word for charm.
Yep.
When we first hear about the Angel of Caprona, Uncle Umberto, the Montana Learned University uncle, says the Angel of Caprona is a spell like any other spell, and without the proper words, any spell is only at half force, even if it is of divine origin. What religion is just slightly better magic. It's nothing to do with divinity. You know, the Montanas all go to church at one point, and they all sing the hymn Angel of Caprona. And everybody gets this sort of vague look on their face because they're all stressing about trying to find the right words.
Right, but there is, in fact, a divine war between good and evil at work in this book, because the ultimate conflict is about an angel and a devil.
Right.
Remember how we said it was Romeo, Juliet, and the White Devil?
Yes.
So the White Devil is, I think, slightly less famous, although still quite famous, tragedy of the 17th century, early 17th century.
Yes.
John Webster was a younger contemporary of Shakespeare's. The White Devil is a play which I read it this month, and I went, he thought of a really good title first,
Yeah.
didn't he?
Yeah, there's not much White Devil in it.
It kind of feels to me like Jones read The White Devil and it's like, needs more devil.
Yes.
And accordingly, in Caprona, there is a literal white devil at work in the city. And the ultimate comeuppance she will face, and it is a she, because it's a horrible older woman.
Of course.
Of course. She is, in fact, going to get turned into a rat and eaten by cats. Stop me if you've heard this one. It is the climax of
Wilkins Tooth.
which is, of course, the climax of what appears to be Jones's favourite fairy tale, Puss in Boots.
It's also the failed climax of Spellcoats,
yes!
which also has an evil enchanter that is putting war in the city and causing all the problems for fun. And they meet Kent Creedon and Spellcoats, and they're like, could you maybe turn yourself into a rat for us? He's like, no, I'm not that stupid. But in Magicians of Caprona, because this is a comedy, in some ways a farce, she is that stupid. She gets, well, I guess it's not really her fault.
No, she's ultimately turned back into a rat, which is revealed to be her true form by Crestomancy. That's the other reason he's here, is to turn the villain into a rat.
And then eaten by her other self. Can we talk about the cats?
Okay, yes, let's talk about the cats. So, in terms of having parallel alternate selves, this is even true down to the family pets. So each of the casas, the Casa Montana, Casa Petrocchi, has an army of cats, and cats are magical. We'll come back to magical cats in the Crestomancy sort of series, actually.
We've actually already had one, but he was much less of a presence than... So yeah. Cat had his cat Fiddle, who was one of his lives.
True. So the cat theme is running through, but the magical cats of Caprona, the boss cat of Casa Montana is Benvenuto, and Benvenuto is fully a character, and in fact quite an important character in Magicians of Caprona.
Yes.
He's Tonino's male role model and masculine guidance through life.
Yes. I think
large
Benvenuto is really explicitly mirrored to Ronaldo, who is Paolo's male role model, who is, of course, the older, dashing cousin who always has the right words to it. Oh, hang on. Actually, I'm going to find a description of Ronaldo because I think it's great. Ronaldo is... Everything came easily to Ronaldo. Girls fell in love with him. Spells dripped from his pen. Paolo admired Ronaldo desperately. He told Tonino that Ronaldo was a true Montana. Tonino agreed because he was more than a year younger than Paolo and valued Paolo's opinions. But it always seemed to him that it was Paolo who was the true Montana. And then later we find out that because Ronaldo is trying to impress this English girl, he's taken to wearing black with a red scarf at his neck like a bandit. He was said to be considering growing a bandit mustache too. So Ronaldo roves all around town, being dashing, getting into fights with the Petrocchis. He is, as we've said, Tybalt, the king of cats. And so does Benvenuto. Benvenuto is scarred.
Benvenuto is literally the king of cats.
He's scarred all over from fights that he's had all over town. He's seduced every lady cat in the neighborhood. But unlike Ronaldo, Benvenuto is true and loyal and loves Tonino best of anybody in the world. Whereas we know that Ronaldo is, in fact, evil.
A fraud.
He's not evil, but he is a fraud. Because he doesn't appreciate.
Ronaldo is, in fact, he's cowardly, he's vain, he's self-absorbed, which is a character type we'll come back to.
Yes, it's a character type. Yes. It is a character type we'll come back to. It's also a character type, though, that we've had before. I think it's very funny that Ronaldo is just the Italian form of the name Ronald. We've had a cousin,
right,
Ronald.
this shitty older cousin who initially seems like a great role model, but the more you get to know about him, the more he's a shallow facade and not much
So the
else.
Ronald to Ronaldo pipeline is, what if cousin Ronald, what if we knew he was hot? And then, well, we'll talk about the Ronaldo to other characters pipeline later. But the reason that we know that Ronaldo is no good, first of all, what causes Paolo to realize that he's no good is that he doesn't appreciate Tonino. Tonino is not vain or selfish or cowardly like Ronaldo. Tonino has all of these qualities. And Benvenuto, the boss cat, recognizes these qualities in Tonino and picks Tonino as his favorite person. And Benvenuto also has, of course, an exact parallel in the Petrocchi household,
Who is the Angelica's pet cat,
right.
the queen cat of the Petrocchis, who is Vittoria. So yes, we're even doing cat heterosexuality this time. They do eventually have
Yep.
kittens.
And Vittoria is the name of the heroine villain of the White Devil, the titular White Devil, who is the
She is
courtesan.
a powerful and dangerous female
Right,
sexuality
she's
in the
not a
White
courtesan.
Devil.
She is in fact a noblewoman, but she ensnares the Duke, and thus causes this string of murders that happens in the White Devil. Revenge murders resonating on down. But in so we've actually split the figure of the White Devil in Webster into two halves. We've got the evil Duchess and the beautiful white feminine cat named Vittoria, who eats the White Duchess at the end of the play. Which leads
It's like, what are we supposed I don't want to analyze this. What does this mean?
But I do think that there is something. So we've seen the split or the parallel, the matching between an evil, white coated, dangerous older woman figure before, who is doted on by the clueless, head of state
Oh
or
god,
whatever.
no, you're right, it's the companion and
It's the
Tibbles.
companion in Tipples. And so, looking at Vittoria and Benvenuto, there's something here where it's like too much gender is a bit suspicious in a human, but it's fine if you're a cat. Cats are supposed to have that much gender in them.
What was I thinking about? I was thinking about the Duchess. I think is a fascinating character.
Yes.
She is a very much a person. Like she's not just like a faceless force of evil. From her
Yes.
first appearance in the book, she does dominate any scene she's in. She's really fun to read. I think.
Yeah.
Tonino describes her as like this powerful figure, this figure who's in control, who's very patient and kind with her husband, the Duke, who is presented as an idiot from the beginning.
Yep.
But Tonino notices she's letting us know how patient she is, and you're always aware of that Duchess's like carefully managed masks or appearances in which she is behaving exactly the way she should, and she's letting you know that that's what she's doing, and in
Yes.
doing so, drawing attention to everyone else's shortcomings.
Yes. Tonino was not sure the Duchess was really like a saint. Her eyebrows were set in a strong, sarcastic arch, and her mouth was tight with what looked like impatience. For a second, Tonino thought he felt that impatience and a number of other unsaintly feelings pouring into the room from behind the Duchess's waxy mask like a strong, rank smell.
Yeah. So there's this image of the waxen mask, the Duchess's face, as opposed to her true self, which is a giant rat.
Right. And instead, she's put on this mask, much like Gwendolyn, of perfect saintly femininity,
Yeah.
and being so, so kind to her sort of frustrating male counterpart.
Right.
Um,
And the thing that's the most frustrating about the Duke is that he is childish. And the
yes.
way his childishness manifests is he is obsessed with Punch and Judy shows, which are comedy for children.
Yes. And so there's something really interesting with the use of Punch and Judy in this book, I think. I think the scene that kind of has the most weight, the most heft in the whole book is when Tonino and Angelica have been kidnapped. They've woken up, they found themselves in a strange place. Everything in this place seems a little bit unreal. It seems shoddy. The everything is painted to look like wood or like marble, but close to it's all just blobs of varnish and huge splinters. Everything's a little bit fake. And then they realize that they have in fact been made small. They are in a stage set and they are being made to act out the play of Punch and Judy.
Right.
Tonino's seen a Punch and Judy show earlier in the book, and he laughed very hard and thought it was funny. This is, in fact, when he first meets the Duke, because the Duke has also wandered in to see this Punch and Judy show. And now he's being made to live through it. Punch and Judy is a comedy? Question mark?
I mean, Punch and Judy is traditional children's entertainment with puppets, in which the puppets carry out violent horrors on each other. And like, there's a long tradition of children being entertained by violent horrors because children love violence. Like, this is Tom and Jerry stuff, right? And in Punch and Judy, the plot is very traditional. It's almost always a variation of the same. The dog steals the sausages. Punch gets in trouble. Punch is arrested. Punch beats up various people. Punch kills the baby. Punch kills his wife. Punch goes to get hanged for his crimes, and Punch hangs the hangman.
Yeah. And when Tonino is being forced to act out this Punch and Judy show, the first person he saw was the Duke of Caprona. He was sitting on a gilded chair in a glitter of buttons, laughing gigantically. Tonino wondered how he could laugh like that at something so horrible, until he remembered that he had stood himself a score of times and laughed himself sick at just the same thing. But those had been only puppets. Then it dawned on Tonino that the Duke thought they were puppets. He was laughing at the skill of the showman. There is I think there's something so interesting in putting Punch and Judy, a comedy that, as you said, litters the stage with bodies, up against Romeo and Juliet and The White Devil, these classic tragedies that are often very, very funny in parts, and that also
Okay.
litter the stage with bodies.
Here is this is not an original insight. I think I got it from A.K. Larkwood. Comedy and tragedy function the same way, especially in theatre, which is that they both run on tension and fulfilled. So if you see the play Oedipus Rex, and Oedipus comes on at the start of the stage and says, "Hello, everyone, I'm here to find out who killed the old man who was the previous king." Haha. The energy, the tension is exactly the same as if you watch a clown walk onto the stage with a very tall pile of plates.
Yes.
You know what's going to happen. You know it's just waiting for the crash.
Yeah.
And this is the way in which comedy and tragedy function the same way. And I think Jones is interested. This is why I was interested in like the comedy tragedy choices of this book. Jones is interested in comedy and in children's comedy, but not just as like, can I write this? It's, why is it funny?
Yeah. What?
Why isn't this funny, or why isn't this tragic?
Yeah.
And it's really striking that the tragic element, the Romeo and Juliet in Caprona, is funny, is a comedy B plot the whole way through, but the comedy element, the Punch and Judy show, is horrible.
It's
Is
awful.
awful. It's really the nastiest part of the book. Is Tonino finding himself forced to play Punch, and a sequence where he has to beat Angelica as Judy to death, and he's afraid he's really done it. He's afraid he's killed her.
Yes. She
But
lay with her head.
even with the minor characters, even the puppets, he's still very upset by it. The part where he has to kick the puppet baby off the stage, and the Duchess, who is the magical power enchanting all the puppets to behave like they're alive, she goes out of her way to make the baby very realistic, to
Yeah.
make it more horrible, but to also to entertain the audience more. And there are two kinds of entertainment happening in that audience. There's
Yes.
the Duke, who doesn't know and who is laughing like a child and being impressed by the skill. And there's the Duchess and her followers. They know, and they're laughing because they know, and it's a cruelty, and it's the cruelty of comedy that
Yes.
Joan is interested in
And
there.
I do also think that there's a little bit of metatextuality in this scene as well. I think in addition to the power of words, we also have the power of a script, the power of being put into a stock part and forced to play that stock part. When we see Tonino railing against being a puppet, against being forced into these actions that he doesn't want to do. And the way that he gets out of this scene is he realizes that when the Duchess is running this show, she says the Duchess was the policeman in a sort of way. She was putting some of herself into all the puppets to make them work. And so he's able to cause her to collapse basically by getting to the part in the Punch and Judy show where Punch hangs the policeman because the policeman is the Duchess. But this is also, like in so many of her books, a bit of a description of how you write a story. You put a little bit of yourself into into a little bit of yourself into all your puppets in order to make them go. And that's what's happening here is I think that, as much as the Duchess is the villain of the story, which means that she's probably in some way Diana Wynne Jones's mother. I think she's also a little bit Diana Wynne Jones. I think she's having a little bit of a comment, a joke on herself, and a comment on herself.
Right, because this figure of the powerful female sorceress who puts herself into her work and whose work shapes the world, that was Tanaqui, right?
Yeah, absolutely it was. And now she's putting the characters through their paces of this comedy or this tragedy. What makes it a comedy? What makes it a tragedy? The puppeteer, the author decides. And in the end, all of the Montanas and the Petrockis, who are these stock parts, they're the comedy Italian aunt, the comedy Italian uncle. I think the individual characters, the characters that we focus on are very well realized, but all the background characters, here's my aunt, here's my uncle, here's my cousin, and they all turn up at the palace to try and rescue Angelica and Tonino, all of them except the kids. And they all get turned into Punch and Judies. They all get turned into stock
All
types.
turned into puppets. Yeah,
Um,
it couldn't possibly be more literal. That ultimately the White Devil is puppeteering everything that happens in the city.
right.
Um,
And they're all these stock types. There was no way of telling which puppet was who. They were Punches, Judies, Hangmen, Sausagemen, Policemen, and the Odd Devil or so over and over again. They're Tybalts and comedy aunts and university uncles over and over again, all just lying in a heap together. And it's a comedy because when they turn back, when they are turned back at the end, all the puppets have been shoved into a cardboard box in a cart. And then they turn back into people, and all of
It's
us,
the Duke's coach, right? So it's like one coach, and they're turned back into people. And this is like, several dozen people, and it's one very small coach.
right, and
And it's
Francesca's
a clown car sequence.
it's a literal clown car.
Erupting from the coach far more than
Exactly.
could actually have fitted it in the first place. Right.
So it's like, where's the turn, right? Like, you can sort of see, I think, through the book, her looking at the beats of comedy and tragedy and being like, it is in my power. I can write a happy ending. I can write a comedy. It is in my power to make this story that I've built up out of several funny tragedies and a horrifying comedy into a comedy. Where am I going to do it? And there's a couple beats, I think, in this book that in any book of the 70s would have turned this to a tragedy. There's a moment towards the end where Benvenuto has come to rescue tiny puppet-sized Angelica and Tonino, and they give him a note to take away, and he goes running away again. And then there's the sound of guns, and Tonino thinks Benvenuto has been shot. This is Cart and Quitter. My horse has been shot. My beloved horse has been shot. This is Dog's body, my beloved dog I'm never going to see again. And
Yeah,
it's not
don't
until
hesitate to kill your pets.
exactly
But in this, but no, wait, Benvenuto's a cat.
Benvenuto's a
He's got
cat.
9 lives.
And so we see him, 2 chapters later, he delivers the note to Paolo, and the text says, it takes more than that to kill Benvenuto. You can just decide not to kill the pet, actually. You just decide for everything to be fine. You can have your Deus Ex Machina come down at the end and say, well, you found the right words, they were here, you can now sing the right spell, and the war is over, actually. The war is over, it's not a
No,
problem.
don't worry about that. It turns out that Pisa, Florence, and Siena are all fine, actually, and everything's going to be all right.
Yeah.
But what actually has defeated evil and allowed them to find the words was the fact that Angelica and Tonino, and then Paolo and Renata, Marco and Rosa, all worked together and overcame the differences and embraced their other selves, in some cases
Exactly.
typically marrying them. And in so doing, reunited Caprona as one complete city of weird wizards.
Right. Everyone with an equally matched weird wizard across the way. At the end, they're all going to have a party at the Petrocchi. The Petrocchis have invited the Montanas to have a party at their house. The 2 comedy great uncles have turned up together to hang out with old Niccolo, who is the head of the Montanas, and stop him from going to the party because he's too ill. Everybody is aligned and matched up. Personally, I actually think that the 2 comedy great uncles have maybe been having a secret affair on the side all along. Who could say?
Perfectly plausible, because everybody is in love with their secret double, right? Like, obviously Rosa and Marco get married, but I feel fairly sure that Paolo and Renata are eventually going to get married, or at least that we're meant to be able to read it that way.
Yes.
Tonino and Angelica, not so much, but Tonino and Angelica do find this like really strong friendship based in how different they are to the rest of their families.
Yes, and they're different in a matched way. Like, they're in a way that complements each other when they're trying to get out. What they discover is that Angelica has the ability to come up with to basically creatively make new spells because she can't get any of the existing spells right. And Tonino, who can't work a spell on his own, has the ability to massively enhance anybody else's spell. So when they're working magic to try and get out of their imprisonment, it's Angelica working really weird spells and Tonino giving her the power to make those really weird spells really strong. And that's what helps them escape. There's this sort of like this sense that you need to partner up with your matched self to become the most powerful version of you. Although I do think also that Tonino and Paolo are also a matched set.
Well,
That's over and over in
and
the book.
Angelica and Renata are.
Yeah. They're also each other's other selves that sort of need to be together to be whole.
Yeah. What else? Was there anything else you wanted to talk about for this one? We talked the war. We talked the double self. We talked.
Yes, we talked about heterosexuality and how she has sort of discovered the power. Oh, I do want to say, I think it is fun and interesting that in the 70s, when we have these masculine matched selves, they all look at each other right away and choose, it's the choice between hatred and love, they choose love. Right away, they are obsessed with each other in kind of a positive, compelled way. I think one of the things that she's discovering in this book is that heterosexuality runs on initially looking at your other self and going, ew.
This is especially true for Tonino and Angelica, right? The instant repulsion they have for each other. They really don't
Yes.
like each other to start with. And it's
Yes.
only in learning that they're the same that they get that enormous strength that eventually lets them defeat the White Devil.
Right. And we're going to see that, I think, deployed to good effect and some heterosexual couples later now that she's unlocked that skill set. The only other thing I wanted to mention is just real quick. I think there's another match set in this book, actually. I think there's an echo between old Niccolo, who's the head of the Montana family, and the Duke, which I think is an interesting contrast to the sort of faux masculinity of Ronaldo. The thing about old Niccolo is that he looks like a baby. Every time we see old Niccolo, he's got the eyes of a sad, anxious baby, and the round face of a baby. He's childlike, much like the Duke. And I think the Duke is explicitly just compared to him at one point, having this huge childlike face. And I do think again it's sort of interesting to watch Diana Wynne Jones try and figure out how to incorporate functional adults into a plot. Again, the family is not the problem for Tonino and Paolo or for Angelica and Renata. When Paolo, I think, one of the ways in which we know the Petrockis and the Montanas are matched is Paolo walks very early in the book. Paolo walks into the Montana yard and feels sort of the warmth and love coming from around him, and it's like, oh, I don't think the horrible Petrocchi household can be anything like this warmth and love that I feel. And then, of course, he walks into the Petrocchi household later, and it's like, oh, it's exactly like this. It's warmth and love. But the family is the problem for the city. These two very powerful enchanter families are literally at the root of the whole trouble. And there's this sort of interesting tension, I think, between the adults as problem that the kids need to solve, directed inwards or directed outwards. The adults in this book are loving, but again, they're a bit childlike. They need children to become the adults and to overcome,
Grown-ups, yeah.
to be the grown-ups.
But by the end of the book, it is literally Rosa and Marco who are the only ones who haven't been turned into puppets, are
Yeah.
left trying to solve pretty much everything. And it's
Yeah.
revealed not just their like comedy cahoots plot, it's revealed how they've been trying to solve things all along. Like there's a whole sequence of like open war in the streets between the Montanas and the Petrockis, which only stops when a mysterious fog comes up, and Rosa and Marco go, "That was us. That was
Right.
us." Putting a stop to the war, single-handed, double-handed, as a pair. But
And you do get a sense that like people would have.
that's why I said that they are kind of presented as part of the children as well as being adults, because they're kind of both at once.
Yeah, and like people would have died during that battle if Rosa and Marco hadn't brought down the fog that stopped them fighting.
Yeah,
So they are,
it's very clear that the stakes are life and death in that battle.
but she still can't quite figure out, I think. So I do think the ending of this book works. We were asking at the in the Q&A, can Diana Wynne Jones write a happy ending that works? I think this one works. I think it lands. It feels justified. But it does need a Deus Ex Machina to happen.
Twice.
2 Deus Ex Machinas. It needs Crestomancy to come in, and it needs to find the right words to unlock the bit of the plot that's the angel coming down. And then not just that, but the angel, after the first problem has been solved, the war is over and the adults are no longer puppets, Marco and Rosa are revealed as Romeo and Juliet.
And
and
then
are
it
like,
starts again, right?
it starts again
That moment that
immediately.
they all start erupting and getting prepared to fight again, and Crestomanci is like, "I guess I'll get you two out of here."
Yeah,
And it's there's a sort of an indrawn breath where you think, are they just going to do the whole stupid plot again?
right. Can you fix Romeo and Juliet? Can you turn it into a comedy? You can if an angel comes down and says, "Really, you guys need to chill out."
And that is literally the ending. The angel descends and looks at them all and says, "Keep our covenant."
Yes.
What that means is, chill out, you guys.
Yes. Have a party. Embrace your other self. So yeah, I think, she's playing with how to do it. And I think she does do it. And, in a children's book you can have the Deus Ex Machina come down and fix things. But it is interesting to see her kind of work out the mechanisms of it.
Yeah, it really is. And it's interesting. I think the next Crestomanci book is Witch Week. So
Yeah.
this is it's a weird sequence of books, right? As a series, especially like you compare it to Delmark, which is thematically coherent, even though it's a
Yes.
very strange series. The Crestomanci series is kind of all over the place in
Yeah.
interesting ways. You can see the different things she's thinking about. But there are these running threads of multiple selves,
Yeah.
and the thread of childhood difference, of being the weird child.
So I'm gonna ask you one last question before we wrap. Why do you think this is a Crestomancy book?
Gosh, I mean, honestly, I think she likes writing him. Like that's really clear. He's fun. He's fun
He's so
to
much
write.
fun.
He turns up, and it's an excuse for a whole series of jokes about steak. You know, which ties into a whole series of jokes about the cooking, which ties into there's a horrible curse on the kitchen because somebody sang a song using the Angel of Caprona trying to do the washing up, and that was a mistake.
Oh, you know what else actually? This has just occurred to me now when we're talking about parallels, which everyone always has a parallel in Diana Wynne Jones. The parallel to Crestomancy in this book is actually the White Duchess. They are both
Powerful
distinguished
enchanters, foreign powers, interfering.
and distinguished by their private jokes and how sarcastic they are. They
Yeah.
come in and they're making a little bit, you have to sort of recognize their secret humor, which Tonino does immediately, is tied to the fact that they're enchanters. Tonino recognizes them first, both as enchanters, and recognizes them as secretly having a sense of humor that's not necessarily obvious to
Having
other
a great
people.
time at everyone else's expense.
Yeah,
Yes. So Crestomanci chuckling up his sleeve about what an Italian scene is perhaps equivalent to the Duchess quietly smiling to herself, knowing that her puppets aren't just puppets.
yeah,
That's interesting. So, because the multiple self, the parallel self, and the multiple universes to me is the hallmark of the Crestomanci series, and it isn't explicitly touched on at all in Magicians of
no.
Caprona. I think it's the only one where it's not touched on at all.
There is a reading of Magicians of Caprona. We've been talking about this as literal Catholicism, and the Montanas and the Patrocchis think of it as literal Catholicism. I think there is a reading of Magicians of Caprona where the White Devil and the Angel are just powerful magic that's come in from another world somewhere, and it has nothing to do with religion at all.
Yep, arguably, because we will see other treatments of religion elsewhere. There'll be more gods and goddesses in later Crestomanci books, which are treated more or less that way.
Yeah,
But it's still a theologically bizarre book.
deeply, 100%. Bizarre book, bizarre follow up to Charmed Life. So much fun, really, really fun.
Extremely good fun. Yeah, like eating a meringue. I said
Like
it and I
eating a
meant it.
meringue. Yes, absolutely. Shall we call it there?
Let's call it there. So, what's our next one?
Great question, actually. I meant to look this up and I forgot.
Oh my gosh, it's Time of the Ghost!
Oh my god!
I can't. Okay, Time of the Ghost as a follow up to Magicians of Caprona is a hell of a swerve.
Oh,
I
that's so
cannot
funny.
wait.
All right, I'm very excited. Yeah, next
Okay,
week,
I
Time of
know
the
what
Ghost.
round is your favourite. Ghost is probably mine. Certainly my favourite of this decade. So yes, I cannot wait. This is
Yes.
going to be good.
This is going to be very exciting. Thank you guys so much for tuning in with us for season 2. We'll be back in 1 week or 2 weeks, depending on how we decide to pace this season yet. We haven't fully made our decision.
All right. Well, see you in 1 week or 2 weeks. Thanks very much, Becca.
Thank you, Em.